I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride, but something touched me deep inside the day the music died. When has the music died in your life, and who has helped you to hear it again? February 3rd, 1959 was when the music died for many followers of rock and roll music. For it was on that day that Buddy Holly, the Big Bopper, Richie Valens, and James Peterson, a 21-year-old pilot of a Beechcraft plane, crashed in Clear Lake, Iowa, in a field. And those three musicians were so much at the forefront of rock and roll music that for many people, they thought that the music had died. And certainly Don McLean felt that way, for he was a 14-year-old teenager, and he was folding his papers the next day that he was about to deliver when he read about the death of the only hero he had at that time, Buddy Holly. And when you look back in your own life, and I have used this many times in Toastmasters, the analogy of the music dying. For me, it certainly died when my 22-year-old nephew was shot and killed on his front lawn. Murder happens so often in this country, and there are many people who can look back at somebody in their family who has been a victim, and that is certainly when the music dies. It could be the music dies when all of a sudden you get a diagnosis of cancer. Somebody who's special, perhaps in your family, hears those dire words that you've got cancer. Or it could be somebody you've touched with all your dreams and all of your future. You've invested in this person, and that person says to you, I don't think we're compatible anymore, or I found someone else. And I know when I look back on September 11th, working on Wall Street when the towers were hit, the music certainly died that day. Innocence itself died. There were 2,977 people who died in the towers, who died at the Pentagon, and died in the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So it was at 8:46 when the American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower. And what's totally amazing is I will remember that day. It was a beautiful day in New York. The sky was blue. And actually, if you go to the 9/11 Museum, that wall reflects the day it was in the city of New York. And I was trying to think, well, how could a plane crash into the towers certainly on such a beautiful day? I was working at the United Way, Tri-State on Wall Street, and my colleague, Jeanette, got a call from Terrell Walker, who used to work with us, and he was then working with the United Way in Dallas. And he said, did you hear? A plane hit the World Trade Center. And we thought, that's incredible. That's impossible. How can that happen? But if you think about it, could be a sightseeing plane. Perhaps, unfortunately, a pilot maybe had a heart attack and crashed into the tower. And we decided, let's go next door and find out some more information, because that was where our main office was, and they had televisions in the break room. So as we were heading down, as the elevator reached the ground floor, all of a sudden a huge explosion. And we tried to figure out, what could that be? We thought maybe it was the transformer on the corner that might have blown up. And it was, in fact, United Airlines 175 hitting the South Tower. And, I think back to that experience. And unbeknownst to me at the time, my cousin Flo had called. And she said, are you okay? Or did you go to help someone? And when I look back on that experience, I had been an emergency medical technician for 17 years in my volunteer ambulance corps, but my certification had expired, and I thought of perhaps helping someone, but we decided that, I decided that maybe I was a little too scared to help someone. And when I look back, I saw all these fire engines, all these police cars, and I saw Engine 4 and Ladder 15 right next door on South Street. They all were heading, sirens blaring, to the west side of the tip of Manhattan. And in fact, that day, 15 of those firefighters died, with 343 total firefighters who died that day. And when I think about the experience of escaping this city, I realized that I understood what terror was, because Jennifer McFadden and myself, she's a co-worker, we decided to leave. We hadn't gotten too far when at 9:59 the South Tower collapsed. A tremendous roar. It almost seemed like maybe just the top of it had fallen off. And we came to a halt in the middle of the street on Fulton Street, and I saw people scattering in all different directions, and we froze. It was as if, what direction is the right direction? It sounded like another plane was coming in. We started to walk towards Penn Station. The subways were closed, so we're walking about maybe 7 or 8 miles to get to the Long Island Railroad. And we saw a man that was covered in dust. And we said to him, well, what happened? He said, I was coming down, I'm not sure which of the two towers, but he said I was coming down from the 23rd floor, and I began to see cracks in the stairwell. And I just barely escaped as the tower came down. It was obvious that, that he had barely escaped. And so then, by the time we got to 14th Street at 1028, the North Tower, the first tower that got hit, that had collapsed. To turn around and to see that empty space was frightening, really. We got to Penn Station, and it was closed. There weren't any trains running, which is kind of logical. And we decided to stop into an Irish bar. There were no phones working. The Guinness was working. And I was suggesting to Jennifer, I said, why don't we stay a little bit longer? And she said, no. She said, I want to get out of here. And so we walked over the 59th Street Bridge, and we were able to find a off-duty limousine driver that took us home. Now, when I look back, it's exiguous. The symbols for 9/11, there's not that many of them. For some people, it could be the twisted beams in the shape of a cross. For others, it could be the crushed helmets of those dead firefighters. But for me, it's a red bandana. Because to me, to this day, a 23-year-old equities trader shouts out to us, what would you do if you had 1 hour to live? That was Wells Crowther. He was the man in the red bandana. And that day, he saved 12 people's lives, made 2 separate trips to save them, to bring them to safety in those towers. He was a volunteer firefighter. He was a graduate of Boston College, Yale Jesuits. He worked for Sandler and O'Neill. He was an equities trader on the 104th floor. And on that day, when the 79th floor was hit, it was when he got into action to actually save people. He carried a black woman on his back. He said to people, I found a way out, carried them on his back, and went down, and then came back up and helped somebody else. And his family, he was an only child. His parents never knew any of this. Matter of fact, it wasn't until March 19th of 2002 that they discovered his body in the remains of the tower where the command center was for the firefighters. But again, his parents didn't know. Allison and his father didn't know what had happened to him. But on May 26th, there was an article in the New York Times, and in that article, it talked about 2 women that had saw a man with a red bandana who had saved their lives. And he said, stand up. If you can help someone, help them now, and follow me. And he actually was able to save those lives. And when his father looked back on the experience, he said it was almost as if he took his equities trader hat off and put his firefighter helmet on. Judy Ween and Lynn Young were the 2 women who remembered he had a red bandana. Now, the way that he got the red bandana is when he was 6 years old, his father, who was also a firefighter, he was a volunteer firefighter, and Jefferson said to him, he said, this is for show, and he said, and this is for blow. And everywhere where Wells went for the rest of his life, he wore that red bandana. So it was very fortunate that the 344th firefighter was able to be identified by the heroism that he did because of the bandana that he wore. So, the lessons from 9/11 are many, but one of the lessons is to treasure freedom. Another lesson is that heartbreak is real. Evil in this world is very real, but so is courage. And the time to say I love you is now, because we don't know whether we're promised tomorrow. There is something that Richard Attenborough said. There is a light in this world, a healing spirit more powerful than any darkness we may encounter. We sometimes lose sight of this force when there's suffering and too much pain. Then suddenly the spirit will emerge through the lives of ordinary people who hear a call and answer in extraordinary ways. What was very interesting to Wells, Father Jefferson, and Mother Allison is when they went to his apartment in Brooklyn, this very well-paid equities trader, they went to his apartment, they found an application to be a New York City firefighter. And in 2006, he was posthumously made a New York City firefighter. If you've never heard of the story of Wells Crowther, he is the man in the red bandana, and I would bring that to your knowledge and to your heart, and I hope that he touches you as much as his story touched me. 9/11 is something I'm still trying to live through, and the words of Deepak Chopra have helped me. For me and my family personally, September 11th was a reminder that life is fleeting, impermanent, and uncertain. Therefore, we must make use of every moment and nurture it with affection, tenderness, beauty, creativity, and laughter. Madam Toastmaster.